Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Roberta Mikalev. I'm a professor of the practice in world languages and literatures and the coordinator of the Turkish program at Boston University. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's panel titled Power, Hierarchy, and Community in 1950s Istanbul, a response to the Netflix series, The Club. The two-season series, which aired between November and January, focuses on the troubled relationship between a Jewish mother and daughter. It has initiated a number of conversations in Turkey and among the Turkish diaspora communities. All three of us panelists here tonight have used Turkish TV series and films in our courses and found that we had much to say about the interplay of literature and history, popular culture, in particular in this series. We come from different academic disciplines, and we viewed the series from a different perspectives, both academic and personal. I hope that our panel will be informative and productive, and I look forward to hearing your questions and responses. Before I proceed, I'd like to thank the Elie Wiesel Center, and in particular, Jeremy Solomons, for tirelessly working to help us bring this panel together. And now I'd like to introduce my distinguished panelists. Our first speaker is going to be Professor Pelin Başçı. She's a professor of humanities in the Honors College at Portland State University. She's received a number of Fulbright awards, among them a Fulbright Scholarship. She has a PhD from the University of Texas in Austin and also did more doctoral work at Temple University. She published a book in 2017 called Social Trauma and Telecinematic Memory, which investigates how Turkish cinema and television depicted the 1980 military coup as a national trauma. Our other panelist is Professor Esra Uzdimish, the coordinator of the Turkish program at Brown University. She also was a Fulbright Scholar. She has received awards. She has taught at Istanbul University prior to teaching at Brown, also at Boston University. Her areas of interest are second language acquisition, heritage and second language teaching, pragmatics, identity, and acculturation.
My name is Sultan Dugan. I'm an anthropologist by training. I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Elie Wiesel Center from 2019 to 2021. Currently, I'm a visiting assistant professor at Clark University in the Stressler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and I will be moderating the second part of this event and discussing the panelists' presentations.
Let us turn the floor over to our first speaker, Professor Pelin Başçı, please.
Well, thank you very much for the generous introduction and for the kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. For reasons that I hope to explain soon, my talk focuses on the first part of the club, the Netflix telenovela or series. From episode 1 to episode 6, I first talk about the next Netflix series as a product of the popular culture, which both amplifies and simplifies its subject matter. Then I will discuss the amplified yet also simplified historical setting from the aftermath of the 1942 wild takes to the 1955 pogroms. Finally, I will turn to the main protagonist, Matilda, to the text and the character as a sign of the cultural capital of cosmopolitanism in New Turkey, which had erased the most visible material and cultural representatives of imperial cosmopolitanism. I will attempt to provide a class-based interpretation of solidarity and conflict by analyzing Matilda's relationships with Chelibis and Selim in part 1. I argue that a cosmopolitan cultural capital is what Chelibis so desires in Matilda and what Selim recognizes and actually finds in Matilda. Now, the telenovela. I use the term popular culture to express signifying practices produced by the culture industry and consumed by the mainstream. I see Netflix as part of the culture industry, and the club, in a way, is a Green Pine production. Green Pine is the term used for commercial cinema of Turkey, sort of like Turkey's Hollywood, which lived its heyday between the 50s and 60s. So here I'm using it loosely to suggest how popular culture makes visible but also simplifies storylines, images, and melodies. Such stories or melodies can perhaps ameliorate the mainstream to the mainstream the images in which Jewish and Christian communities can be vilified through stereotypes and with references to, say, interest lobbies and other derogatory expressions. On the upside, alternative images and sounds find an outlet. On the downside, all stories, melodies, and images are made to fit into a certain pattern or certain mold to become commercially viable products. The tension between the liberating creative energies and the stifling commercial interests has already been explored by many, many scholars. In addition, existing scholarship on Turkey's narrative cinema has revealed that artists and directors have had to deal with a lot more than the tension between artistic and commercial interests. Social and political pressures have always played significant roles to varying degrees. Political pressures can find indirect pathways to commercial interests as well. I do not know. While watching part 2, I realized that the productive energies we had harnessed in the first part of the series were abandoned in favor of a jovial storyline, except for the depiction of the 1955 pogroms. The club completed its story by taking a turn towards magical realism. Characters seemed different, storylines were left unexplored. For example, the evil Aziz Chelibis turned into an agreeable man who could be redeemed by his love for Matilda. I do believe in the round that is non-flat and realistically changing characters, but I found Chelibis' transformation an insult or an offense to storytelling conventions. Similarly, at the end of the first part, we left Russia aboard the ship sailing to Israel. In the second part, she was already back in Istanbul preparing to give birth in the company of her mother and Selim. What happened in Israel? Why exactly did she come back? All of these rhetorical maneuvers may have something to do with commercial or political pressures and core disagreements about the significance of the historical events depicted in the club. But what are those events? So, I'm going to share a couple of slides here. Please bear with me. Okay. Okay. The club takes place between two historical moments that are often ignored in standard narratives of national history: the 1942 Welttext and the 1955 pogroms. Groundbreaking scholarship by Ayhan Aktar, among others, has shed light on the appropriation and Turkification of the financial capital of Jewish and Christian communities in 1942. The tax aimed to punish war profiteers and flush the suffering of economy with funds originally levied against all wealthy. In practice, it was weaponized against Armenian, Greek, and Jewish communities. Due dates and amounts were unmerciful. Those who could not quickly meet the demands were sent to labor camps, such as the one in Erzurum's Ashkele. Many had to sell their property at below market value, immediately in effect being dispossessed of their assets. This event defines the club's main character, Matilda's painful backstory. As a turning point towards which the story evolves, the 1955 pogroms play an important role. On September 6-7, 1955, non-Muslim businesses in large cities, particularly in the Beyoğlu district of Istanbul, were attacked by mobs of people. Their property was looted, ransacked, and destroyed. Attendants and owners were beaten, and in some cases, women were raped. Some churches were also damaged. The explosive events were instigated by provocative press coverage about Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's home in Thessalonica being bombed, and against the background of negotiations regarding the status of the Turkish minority in Cyprus. The pogroms have been investigated by Dilek Güven, whose pioneering work come through the personal archive of naval judge Fahri Çöker, who had donated his documents to Turkey's History Foundation on the condition that the documents would be published after Çöker's death. Judge Joker had served in courts pursuing the culprits of 1955. With his passing in the 2000s, Dilek Güven was able to organize the photographs and analyze the documents. An effort that revealed that the riots were set into motion well ahead of time. Documents intimated involvement at the highest levels of the Democrat Party government. They also portrayed how mid-level security operatives and mafiosos served as the dark organizing energy behind the violent events that pitted the urban poor against the middle-class cosmopolitan communities of Istanbul. The club situates itself between these dark events that bookend the 1950s. And that's what this particular slide shows, with the club in the middle. And on the left, you're seeing an auction of somebody's estate. On the right, you're seeing the coverage of the journal Social History of the 1955 pogroms when Dilek Güven and others were able to go through Çoker archive. The 50s had many continuities with the war years. Even though Turkey had not become an active theater, World War II brought dire economic consequences and heavy Nazi propaganda and media infiltration at home. The political transformation from single to multi-party electoral politics had opened the question of what the Kemalist Republic stood for, its cultural disposition, only to encounter new political and economic challenges by the mid-1950s. Now, off to the text itself and to the character Matilda. The club is not the first visual narrative depicting these violent events for mainstream audiences. In the 1990s, Yılmaz Karakoyunlu's novel entitled Diamonds of Miss Salcombe portrayed the wild takes, and it was made into a film by Tomris Kilitlioğlu. Similarly, Karakoyunlu novel depicting the 1955 pogroms, Autumn Pain, was made into a film by Kilitlioğlu, generating a heated debate about the depiction of the female protagonist. How does Matilda signify the socioeconomic tensions of the period depicted in the film? I argue that during the first season examined here, Matilda emerges as a sign and symbol of cultural cosmopolitanism in Turkey. In order to reveal how the film maps these tensions, I turn to two of Matilda's relationships, the two nominally Muslim men in her life, the evil Aziz Çelebi and the flamboyant Selim. Excluding Niko Orhan, whose story deserves more space, Çelebi and Selim represent the most significant male relations Matilda has. They also stand on two different ends of the class and culture spectrum. Both the club manager Çelebi and the club singer Selim view Matilda as a powerful and desirable companion, an asset. Part 1 insinuates Çelebi's transformation from a humble provincial tea boy to a powerful club manager in Istanbul's most famous avenue. Çelebi's relationship with Matilda is fraught with tension, even though Matilda lacks money, support, status, all of which Çelebi has superficially. As the manager, Çelebi keeps histories and identities hostage. He taunts Matilda with the events of her past. For every dark act he refrains from committing on the screen, we feel that he has committed countless others. That is how Aziz, perhaps a reference to his saintly roots as a rural tea boy, is transformed into Çelebi, the club manager, the rough guy, the labor broker. The name Çelebi suggests a man of education, in fact, refinement, manners, courtesy, which of course Çelebi lacks in reality. You see Matilda and Çelebi on the left of this slide. Serving now as Matilda's boss rather than her help, Çelebi shamelessly feels entitled for her affections. Why can't the beneficiary of Matilda's lost fortunes also appropriate her true love, knowledge, and refinement, especially now that Mümtaz is out of the picture and Matilda is free? Çelebi desires and knows he cannot possess Matilda's love and social aura, her intangible assets, her experience, and her ways of reading the world. Selim, on the other hand, represents the Muslim middle class that had already been a partner to the non-Muslim bourgeoisie in the transformation of late Ottoman urbanity. He comes from a cosmopolitan background, follows fashions and trends abroad, situates himself at the forefront of new technologies like the radio and tastes like the musical cabaret. Selim and Matilda immediately strike up a friendship. No words need to be exchanged between the gay musician who is rejected by his conventional family and the dispossessed Jewish woman who is struggling to reconstitute her family. They recognize in each other the cultural know-how that can navigate the unexpected. Matilda and Selim come from similar class backgrounds and are familiar with other ways of seeing and organizing the world. Examining the 21st century Jewish experience in Turkey, Marci Brink-Dannen describes the persistent erasure and devaluation of the community's financial and political presence. Dannen's work underscores a particular definition of cosmopolitanism, one that does not only move across different cultural and geographical spaces, but also knows, quote, how to interpret and manage difference, end of quote. Her class and social formation make Matilda stand out as a sign of cosmopolitan cultural capital. Matilda embodies not just difference as in the film's opening scenes in prison, but also the skill to manage difference with heightened awareness. She can have Selim chart his course. If Chelibis strikes a blow at the nosy journalist trying to siege Selim, Matilda gently distracts them. According to Pierre Bourdieu, capital is not limited to the tangible material wealth that can be inherited, confiscated, expanded, or exchanged. It can be cultural as well. Quote, cultural capital in the embodied state in the form of what is called culture, cultivation, Bildung, end of quote, requires generations of accumulation and transmission inside families and communities. I have argued that Matilda stands as a symbol of a cosmopolitan cultural capital that is simultaneously desired and resented. Selim and Matilda do not just share experiences of marginalization, but also they share an understanding and appreciation of that cosmopolitan disposition, which Chelibis resents, because of his inability to access it. Even if her family assets have been confiscated, her daughter left in an orphanage, her ID card and photographs impounded, Matilda still owns more valuable intangible assets than the total sum of what Chelibis has acquired. Selim's flamboyant artistic personality encounters and survives socially restrictive environment of patriarchal relationships because of Matilda's support, friendship, and resilience. Finally, in Matilda's words and acts towards Chelibis, we hear loud and clear the statement, "You may have my body," meaning my worldly treasures, but never my spirit. Vücuduma sahip olabilirsin ama ruhuma asla. This is the main theme of part 1, in my view, which is undone by part 2. It is also one of Green Pine's most recognizable cliches. Thank you. Sorry, I would like to introduce also our next speaker, Esra Uzdimish.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pelin. I'm sorry, so I'll just continue with my presentation. So I'll talk about the power relations in and beyond the club and how the club creates a new discourse of reconciliation by generating new power structures, which could play an important role for the local and diaspora communities of Turkey. From my perspective, I see club as a restorative effort to emphasize the historical facts via a sincere narrative to inspire a reconciliatory discourse. I consider this discourse that it creates to be constructive and uniting. The club restores societal memory and also encourages viewers to develop awareness and a critical eye toward asymmetrical power relations, with a hope to launch a new phase of more just and symmetrical relations between institutions, the society, and the communities and the people of the society. When I watch it, there were two things that came to my mind. So what I saw, and when I think about the club, like as a whole, so there are these things that I call the bodies of power. And when I say bodies of power, I'm talking about the club, both as a production, media as power, and the club story, the power of the narrative. The other power that is that comes as the state, in this case, the state of the Turkey, the Republic of Turkey, and also the society, including the past and the present Muslim and non-Muslim communities of Turkey, and the diasporic communities of Turkey as well. The second component that is underlined, I would say, in the club is kind of corresponds to what Foucault calls forms of power, and he means the economic, political, ideological, and religious, and informational, and ethnic power. So the club considers the intersection of different bodies of power and how forms of power are used by those bodies to challenge each other. And this is a multifaceted relation between the bodies of power in and beyond the club. And these are given explicitly, generally, and within the club. My understanding, the aim is to create a discourse of reconciliation. I use the term discourse of reconciliation as an opposition, as an opposite of discourse of otherization. Because the bodies that I try to explain, the club, state, and society, all have power to change the discourse in a spectrum from, let's say, otherization to reconciliation. And as opposed to the discourse of otherization created by the state, statesmen, and the state law in the past, and still, unfortunately, I believe in present, which has been supported by parts of the society, the club stands out as a successful body of power to create a discourse of reconciliation as an opposition to otherization. And this new discourse also harmonizes with the recent Turkish political atmosphere, in which a political party is outspoken about helalleşme with the citizens of Turkey. It's not very clear what they're talking about when they say helalleşme. We don't know if it encompasses the past in terms of the state and non-Muslim relationship, or Muslim and non-Muslim community relations. But there is this discourse that is kind of like tried to be created by the in the political arena as well. So I feel like there is kind of like intertextual parallelism between the discourses created in the political arena in Turkey and the club as well. I'd like to also talk about the forms of power the club has as a commercial product, because as we know, it's a Netflix product, and the economic power of the club is, for that reason, is unquestionable. And as Netflix, invests heavily in expanding its reach into the Turkish market, which has introduced Turkish content to millions all around the world. And this economic power also enables a quality commercial product. And ease and accessibility enables the spread of reconciliation discourse within the communities and in and beyond Turkey. And I think this assigns a particular importance to the issue, as there are many non-Muslim communities who unwillingly left Turkey because of their marginalization. It is also important, I think, that there is the synergy between ethos, Bir Başkadır on Netflix, and the club as well, because they both challenge the dominant ideologies and religious and non-religious views, state law regulations, and things like that. So apart from the economic and political and cultural influence of Netflix, the club itself is a successful production with its directors, actors and actresses, and cinematography. However, I'd like to, rather than those, I'd like to talk a little bit about the narrative, to see the forms of power within the story. So the power relations displayed in the story are based upon the historical facts and unfold among the state and non-Muslim communities and among the individuals of different communities as well. And as you know, there are many references to asymmetries among the state and its citizens in terms of economy, policy, ideology, and ethnicity. And in the relations between the bodies, although one part exercises power on the other, and sometimes quite harshly, there are scenes like that, the underdog is never victimized. On the contrary, the discourse of reconciliation is based upon not on victimization, but what I understand is upon the act of dissidence and the solidarity among the dissident characters of the same and different ethnic communities. The club created characters that could challenge the state power and any power that comes with it. And the underdog has a powerful voice as a challenger of power rather than a victim. So now I'd like to refer to some of the scenes in the first season to look at those asymmetrical relations. So the first one, and how there's solidarity and act of dissidence as well. So the first scene, as we know, Matilda kills her lover because her lover rats out Matilda's family to the state, and Matilda's killing her boyfriend. I just perceive, I kind of like categorize it as an act of dissidence, as the boyfriend represents people who took the advantage of the state's law and regulation. So that scene and the background historical knowledge that come with the scene make the viewer think about, you know, how a body of power can use various forms of power to suppress a group of people. The other important thing that stood out for me in the first season was how, you know, how Russia breaks into the club to take back Tasula's identity card, which had been forcefully seized by Chelibis, the Turkish manager of the club. Russia's solidarity with Tasula to steal her passport from Chelibis' office is also an act of dissidence against the patriarch and the discriminative state. The female characters show solidarity against Chelibis, who represents the power of patriarch, the state, and the manager, which I think like class power. So all those three powers are challenged by Rachel and Tasula, and all these three powers almost like found body in the Chelibis character in the first season. And as Professor Pelham mentioned, Chelibis completely changes in the second season, and I'll just talk about that later on. We see a mutual solidarity between Matilda and Anatolian immigrant, and which I again think that solidarity is part of an act of dissidence, and that corresponds to a dissidence against the class distinction. Class solidarity among the people of the same classes who belong to different religious and ethnic communities is represented clearly in some of the scenes. One of the scenes that I'm sure you will remember is when Chelibis tells Matilda to clean and prepare a room for the head singer on a Shabbat day. The Anatolian worker is the one who cleans the room with Matilda until late hours. And there's an excellent extended reference to that solidarity, as the scene of the cleaning room lasts more than a minute in the episode. Again, the solidarity between non-Muslim and Muslim workers at the club is also expressed in other scenes visually, because we see people like the laundry personnel, waitresses, and other workers working together in a harmony and sometimes in harsh conditions. But when you watch those scenes, you feel that is given that solidarity. So you feel that solidarity. Another reference was to the LGBTQ solidarity, I would say. And I see that again as a dissidence against the patriarchal state, as Orhan insists on hiring Selim Songur and support his new show on stage. However, I think LGBTQ solidarity is only a subtle element in the story, and I think a question could be like, why some of the topics are given that subtly? Because we understand that Selim, as you know, I mean, they're both gay characters, but the relation between them is just given very subtle, although we know that, they're gay. The other one is, I think the other examples of act of dissidence, again, against the patriarchal state and its ideology, is given between Matilda Çelebi and Reşal Fıstık-İsmet relations, as you know, and very clearly. In both relations, the males represent patriarchal state, and that's how I perceive it, at least, the male power and the societal power. And this is observed in many scenes and many dialogues. And one of them is the easy one that comes to mind is the one when Aysel tells Fıstık-İsmet about her real name being Rachel and her being Jewish, and then we know what happens. But the thing that attracted my attention, once again, the female characters are and these relations are the underdogs, but they are not victimized in the story. They are always able to challenge the institutional state and societal power with their relations with their, with Çelebi and İsmet. So for the first season, as opposed to anti-Semitic tropes manifested through Jewish characters in past Turkish movies, protagonists Matilda and her daughter Rachel are depicted as strong, righteous, and dissident characters. And in my opinion, the creation of this new reconciliation discourse is important to empower historically underdepicted minorities as well as the underdog. In the second season, things change, as you know. So I believe, my understanding is the narrative kind of changes as the power relations are structured differently. The act of dissidence that I was talking about is very observable in the first season. It kind of softens in the second season, and that particularly happens because the Çelebi character becomes just a complete opposite of what he was in the first season. Which is a deliberate strategy that I call deliberate strategy of euphemism in the second season. And I think this is, this might have been done, I'm not sure, but for maybe the sake of reconciliatory discourse again. We know that they, it's so obvious that they are aiming for a uniting discourse because the last scene is the happy dinner, and which is reference to the cosmopolitan structure of old Istanbul and Anatolia. And there's this newborn baby which could be seen as a possible new page, or a pure humanity or a similarity, or as a reference to how we are born without religion or culture, and so that takes us there. For the second season, there are, as I have read, some criticisms about the number of the Greek characters and how Tasula particularly is represented, which I totally agree. But even with that, I still believe that the message has a positive effect on the viewers. So I'd like to give three scenes from the club, and then I'm gonna leave the floor to Roberta. So the one that I want to talk about is the relationship, the power relation between Rachel and İsmet in the second season. As you know, in the second season, Rachel goes back to İsmet as she learns that her mom Matilda had killed her dad, and Rachel is very powerless and destitute of support, and her dissidence against İsmet kind of disappears at first. Until İsmet accuses her for unfair play, kaçak dövüş, and she leaves him behind. And then once again, we see that the underdog, or the subject of power, was not victimized. On the contrary, I think in that relation, the İsmet just caused a lot of question in my mind, because İsmet, who rejected Rachel because of her identity until the last scenes of the episode, was victimized That's how I perceived, as he was beaten almost to death because he said, "I'm not one of you," to those guys who were holding the sticks in the Istanbul pogrom, as you know. And I personally find the message, it was not Ismet's fault to leave Russia, but it was like some sort of like societal pressure that caused that. And that's a misleading a message for me, at least, because I believe individuals have personal responsibilities in this discriminative and non-discriminative acts. And the other one is Chelibis' abuse of power. Again, this appears in the second season, as his attitude toward Matilda is complete opposite of the first season. And so this approach eliminates Matilda's dissident stance, and because there isn't anything to resist against Chelibi at that point. And the mindset of the state reference to Chelibi that I saw in the first episode diminishes in the second season, and the effort of changing the power relations become very clear. There are like scenes like, you know, when Chelibi says, "I wish I had killed Mumtaz," or he gives the earrings back to Matilda, tears the check that he received from Kürşat. And most importantly, Çelebi is the one who opens the door to the crowd and allows Matilda and Rochelle to enter. So these scenes depict the change in power relations between the characters, and they were most probably used to evoke a reconciliatory discourse. However, the second season depictions of Ismet as a victim of societal pressure and Çelebi as a misunderstood man, but essentially a good man, even though he abused his power at every level in the first season, raises an important question in my mind. Why are these two Turkish male characters absolved of their sins in the second season? Lastly, I'd like to talk about Kürşat and his power, which reminds me the deep state. There is the Ayhan Aktar, the writer of the wealth tax and the Turkification policies of Turkey. He was on a video and he said he thinks that Kürşat is a dönme, meaning like he changed his, identity, changed his religion, and he says that dönme characters are like more strict than the originally Turkish characters. We understand that he is dönme because he speaks Greek with Orhan and Orhan's mom. In Kürşat's dialogues with Muslim and non-Muslim characters, there's a clear difference in the use of power. Kürşat uses his power over Çelebi to show solidarity of Turkishness, whereas he exercises power over Orhan abusively, as Orhan is a Greek from Izmir. And Kürşat's reference to the deep state becomes clearer when he says, "I want to be a shadow in our partnership," to Orhan. And that shadow has also put the non-Muslim minorities at unease in Turkey. Similar to Orhan's nervousness of his identity, Matilda's nervousness is explicitly given in every encounter of her with Kürşat. And that feeling expressed through the characters Orhan and Matilda reminded me of Hrant Dink's description of güvercin tedirginliği, pigeon-like nervousness, and how his assassination unfortunately verified that nervousness. So that's all. Now I'd like to leave the floor to Roberta.
I certainly hope that my internet will behave this time around. So, okay, my presentation is going to be much more personal, a mixture of the personal and academic. As I watched the first episode of this series, season 1, episode 1, I found myself tearing up because this was the Istanbul that I knew. My father actually was born in 1936 and his family lived in Beyoğlu on a side street, Bursa Sokak, if anybody knows the area. We were well aware of the incidents of the wealth tax. We had an extended family member where the entire family had to pull together resources to pay off the tax so he wouldn't end up in Ashkale. The pogrom of 1955, my mother, my father told us that they had been at the summer house and they were coming back to the city, discovered that their neighborhood had been destroyed. His younger sister was wearing a blue and white dress that day, and a neighbor came and wrapped his coat around her and said, "This is not the day to be seen with those colors on this street." So having grown up in a non-Muslim family in that neighborhood, we were very much aware of the events of what happened in both 42 and 55. And it was just watching the neighborhood, hearing Ladino, Greek, Armenian. It was such a sort of, one realized how important representation was, because this was the first time that I know of on Turkish TV that Jewish characters in particular were represented as real people with stories, not stereotypes. And for the sake of research and also to be able to share some solid information with all of you, I went and looked at Turkish newspapers. There's a very good publication online called Avlaremos. They say when they introduce themselves that they are putting this newspaper online in opposition to Chelibis, which was be quiet. Their point of view is that we should all speak. And between November, when the first series, the part 1 aired, and January part 2 aired, they had over 70 articles about this show. So the show was well watched, well received, much discussed in Turkey as well as abroad. I think I saw a question about that somewhere in the discussion. And I liked part 1. I did not particularly care for part 2. In fact, I might as well say that I really disliked part 2 with a passion. I was watching Turkish Twitter. I was not alone. Turkish Twitter, Facebook, etc. exploded every time a new season of this show showed up. Lots of discussions around it. I watched the show with great interest. I wanted to see how they used the ideas of community, how they used language to mark belonging or not belonging to the community, how language could work as a door opener or something that closed the door. And if we're going to think of the autonomous family unit as the cornerstone of the modern nation state, how did this show deal with family in particular, and the maternal and paternal roles in these families? And in fact, the first episode, those of you who watched it will know, there is this scene. We witness an exchange between Matilda Aseo as she has come out of prison and she goes back to Galata at the time, or which was once called Kula, and visits Monsieur David, a member of the Sephardic Jewish community. And she uses Ladino and Turkish and says, "I want to go to Israel," to Monsieur David. And I found that exchange in and of itself fantastic, because you have Ladino, you have Turkish, you also have the French honorifics that were used among the various minority communities for exchanges. And his response is, "We've been here for 400 years. This is our homeland. We're still a big family here in Kula," the old name for Galata. So the show opens with the notion of family, sort of small family, extended family, being part of an ethno-religious community, and thinking of that as an extended family. By the end of the show, season 2, Matilda's brother, who it turns out has escaped Ashkale and survived and gone on to the States and formed a new life in the States, offers to bring her to the States with him. And her response is, "I belong here. My family is here now." So we start with a woman who says she has no family, distances herself both from the extended Jewish community. Her own biological family is dead, except we know that she has a daughter that she gave up. And then by the end, we have a woman who reconstitutes the people of the club as her extended family, or the people she has crossed paths with in the club. The director of the show, in an interview in November, said that in this show, her aspirations for this series was that, we come together with our emotions without any division based on religion, language, race, or sexuality. The 1950s was a period when this multiplicity was lived beautifully. We wanted the characters to connect through their wounds and emotional state. So although, there's a massive contradiction between what she's saying and what the show is telling us, right? Because we see what happened in 1950, we see what happened in 1942 in the show, 1955 and 1942. So the multiplicity is not necessarily as beautifully experienced by everyone. And those of us who know about the sort of early Republican period also know that these were not isolated incidents. There was minoritization going on early on. But if we look at the families that we are presented with, I think we end up with something very unusual. There is not one happy family in this entire series, or one intact family even. Matilda, when we first meet her, her mother has passed away. Her brother says to us, the viewers, that, oh, Matilda has always been the mother of this family. Matilda is already pregnant with her Turkish lover, Mimtaz. She has to figure out how to get her father to allow her to marry him. Rachel, Matilda's daughter, that she gave up when she went to prison for murdering Rachel's father. Rachel is pregnant at age 17 by a Turkish Muslim gentleman. And she herself does not reconstitute doesn't become part of a family. Orhan, who it turns out is actually Nico, a Greek gentleman. We meet him with his mother. His father isn't part of the picture either. They probably lost him in the Izmir fire. And although nothing is said about Izmir and the Izmir fires, there are references to it visually and otherwise. Tasula grew up in the orphanage, does not have a family. So in all of these sort of non-Muslim families, the men are missing. The adult male of the family is missing. And then when we look at the two Turkish families that we're introduced to, or Turkish characters with families, Selim, the singer and performer who wants to sort of mix Eastern and Western styles of entertainment, we briefly meet his mother in one very dramatic scene. She manages to get into the club. Matilda facilitates him meeting his mother, although he doesn't necessarily want to. They have a terrible fight. She tells him that he's a big disappointment. He's ashamed, or he's embarrassing his family the way he behaves. And she breaks off and tells Matilda not every mother can make his child happy. His father is still alive, but he's considered an embarrassment, in particular to the father. And then in season 2, he comes back from Paris with these interesting outfits he wants to wear on stage. But when it turns out that if people start looking into his past and discover his connection to Matilda and Rachel, he's going to get into trouble. So he once again puts away his beautiful outfits from Paris and presents himself in a more society-wise, seemly manner. He tells Matilda, I thought once my father died, I would be free of societal pressure, and he's not. And then Russia and Ismet, he also comes from a household without a father present. We learn that he tried to kill his father because he went home early and found his father in bed with a neighbor's wife, I think it was. So he threw his father out, almost murdered him in the process. And we see the confrontation between father and son. And during the pogrom, the father gives up his son, basically doesn't protect his son against the hordes that are attacking people and burning down the place. Missing parents are very much part of traditional narratives. When there's political upheaval, often the father is represented as missing. And if a daughter is not socialized properly, a mother is represented as missing in a story. We have one happy moment in this movie when people are constituting themselves as a family, and that is when Selim, Rachel, and Matilda are all living under one roof together of their own volition, without any concern about, is somebody married, is somebody not married, is a child going to be born out of wedlock, is the male figure in this household a gay man. He is going to take Matilda on as his legal child. I mean, Rachel's child as his legal child. So we have this one moment where the three of them are genuinely happy to be living together, have constituted a new kind of family. But this family falls apart under social pressure. Selim, when Matilda's secret comes to light, Rachel leaves and goes to Ismet, which again makes no sense. The young woman that we met in the first season, who was independent, strong, a little brash, that in the second season, she will leave and go to the home of a man who hit her when he found out that she was Jewish, makes absolutely no sense. But in any case, social pressure makes them fall apart as a unit. And I would like to tie this back to what the director told us that she was trying to achieve. And perhaps this is where there is some light, that she's trying to tell us that perhaps if people can move away from ethnic identities, religious identities, etc., and meet each other as human beings, there is a chance for genuine happiness. I'm a little lacking in optimism on this, because we all live in institutions and structures, and we have legal identities as other kinds of identities. So if that is where we are heading, there is a lot more work that needs to be done. I'm actually going to stop talking now, because I know that I can see that there are lots of questions for all of us. And I know that Sultan has prepared she's going to pull all of us together and has some questions that she would like to ask us too. So if we can have everyone on the panel show up again, we can turn the floor over to Sultan, or the mic.
Thank you, Roberta and Pelin and Esra, for giving such careful readings of this show, which has been quite a firecracker. And thank you also for Roberta sharing these personal notes. I think that's very important to do this. There are already 5 questions in the Q&A, so I will try to be very brief. I want to just give a short historical background, watching this maybe as a diasporic person myself, who grew up in Germany, and who, when she reads 1942 and hears about Jews, that's the height of the Holocaust. That's when people are being deported from all over Europe into concentration camps that were built in Eastern Europe. This is when the club starts, 1942, we also see a kind of a deportation, but it seems both very personal and minor. And in a way, also 1955, basically the space-time in which this is organized, it seems that on one hand, violence is shown, but there's always this turn into the internal, into the personal, less into the politics, as Pelin, I think, also pointed out, and as you, Roberto, also just pointed out, with the references that are made, but never explained. So one thing that I want to basically tease out here, and maybe also push you to say more, is if in the way this show is made, does it perhaps somehow confirm a certain Turkish national narrative that we've been used to hearing of 500 years of friendship and some incidents, some problems? And I do want to acknowledge that it does show violence in a form that has not been shown in the same way when it comes to Jewish and Greek communities. But I wonder, especially, that it centers the figure of the Jew, which has kind of become in Europe and through a European lens, the minority par excellence, if it's telling us a story that kind of gets away a bit too good, and that could not be told in the same way if we were to look at Armenians, Kurds, or Alevis, right? So this is just one kind of teasing into this. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and that you all kind of pointed towards, is, I think Esra said, it's a reconciliatory discourse, there's reconciliation, there's solidarity. And Roberta, you said, you know, when I grew up and in the beginning, when I watched that first season, it was good to hear the languages, right? There was, I think, kind of a hopeful gesture in the first season, but in the second season, none of this is there. I mean, Esra, with you, I have a very specific question with the reconciliation, because it kind of, I was really disturbed by how it ended, but I would like to know, were you there, saw the reconciliation too? But in the second season, none of the Ladino is not there. The wanting to go to Israel, having transnational ties, Mordo, the Israeli fiance, the Jewish fiance with whom Rachel was going to Israel, is also not there. All of this is erased. And the possibility to tell a story that would go beyond the bounds of Turkey is somehow undone. And also, like, language-wise undone. We don't hear any Sephardic. And I think in one of the last scenes, we see actually that levha, that pano that says Vatandaş Türkçe konuş, right? So that is really reinserted there. So I was wondering, how do we think about this as beyond social pressure that is being represented, also kind of a way of making this film or this show as really aligning with a narrative that seems quite Turkey-centric? Why is that? Or like, what is your take on that? With the figures, especially with the solidarity and reconciliation, I had actually several questions, but I will just try to try to focus this on one. And I think Roberta said very poignantly, the men are always missing. And in that last scene, we see Tasula, who was perhaps raped, certainly sexually assaulted, and who was sexually assaulted throughout the show, sitting there next to some man and Chelebi. And it seems to me this scene of reconciliation is really like, hey, we can get along if you guys can forget the violence that we just inserted on you, that we just exerted, that we just like did. And yeah, it's bad, it's wrong, there are worse guys out there, but you know, if we come together, we can forget. And there I thought, what kind of a reconciliation are we actually seeing? What kind of a possibility is this? Which is really based on like the hierarchy of who's already in power. So there I thought, Esra, if you could say more how you still saw this as reconciliation and solidarity.
So, sorry.
And then, yes, and then the last question that I want to ask Pelin, which I thought was really interesting how you contextualize this in the history, and also the history that Dilek Güven excavated, really. And I was wondering, what is this show in a way kind of doing as a starting point? Because I do think that part of it is really unknown. It's great that some of these things are shown to the majority of like innocent and ignorance, but at the same time, what is it about that history that can find its way into a show, but obviously does not find its way into larger society, into textbooks, into a certain consciousness? And I want to end this by saying my first research project in my life ever was Sephardic. And I will never forget one of the speakers there. I mean, there was certainly a language hierarchy between Turkish, French, and Spanish, Sephardic. And French was kind of valorized far more. But one thing that came out always in the conversations was that, look, you know, we as Jews were safe in Turkey. Our neighbors in Greece, they could have been deported. They were deported. We were not. We should be grateful. And this is how the story was always closed, how the like, our kind of inquiries about why not keep Sephardic, why not cultivate this language? What does it mean to you? It was always like, we have to be grateful. This is kind of where we are. It's fine as it is. It could be worse. So given that things could be worse and things sometimes also were worse, how do you see this as kind of like a hope-making show, or like a show where where can we go from here, also as scholars? So if each one of you maybe briefly can respond, like 2 minutes before we take up, I think there are 5 questions in the Q&A.
I can, oh, Pelin, if you want to start, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just go forward. It may be shorter, that's why I hope. First of course, shows are very important. Cultural products, these are packaged products. I mean, there are companies behind this. There's Media 03 company, which works with Netflix. There's a whole crew of people, an army of people putting it together. We should not lose sight of that fact. And in fact, there are two directors. I want to say something about that too. So one of the directors is Zeynep Günaytan. The other director is actually someone that you may remember from the film The Majority, which was a very, very touching film in my view. And it did depict a Kurdish character in love with a Sunni Muslim guy who comes from a very conventional sort of families and so on and so forth. So it is very interesting how the two of them came together for this show. I sort of wondered a little more about that, but I couldn't find too much. From what I can see, Seren Yüce, the director of The Majority, Çoğunluk, it is really an incredible film as far, I mean, it is dark, I have to say, so don't expect something like The Clap, frankly, I mean, not even music. So, but Seren Yüce apparently did, episodes 5, 6, 7, 8 or something like that. So like in the middle, we see the presence of another director, but then, on both ends we have, and in fact, for The Majority, Zeynep Günaytan, who apparently also worked with Kurtlar Vadisi, which makes it even more interesting. I mean, what a darkness is lurking behind Kurtlar Vadisi is a whole nother discussion, another webinar. But in any case, very interesting to directors. It's a product, and of course, how does it work with history when history books do not even acknowledge the history that is sort of suggested only, but not really fully explained. I think that it is still significant. I will say something about the context here for the Turkish context, audienceship, like spectators in Turkey. I think even the signifying acts, are very, very valuable for them. Maybe not coming out and fully contextualizing and saying it, but even pointing in that direction and signifying, I think is valuable because Turkey is going through a very stifling period. I mean, it is really hard to describe how hard it is to, like open up conversations like this publicly. So I think that we do have to appreciate different contexts here because really contexts generate meanings. I mean, you can signify things in different contexts and you can acquire different meanings out of them. So I think that that's what I would say. I still find it valuable, although of course I would much rather, there's a way in which the narrative of the nation state incorporates, in its storytelling, these very important events. And that how violence is in fact a part of that story, very much a part of that story. To Sultan's question. Yeah, I think I will leave it at that for now.
I can continue. I actually agree with Pelin, and I find this this production very valuable as well, and that's the reason why I think I have been using discourse of reconciliation, because I think the intention, what I see was very good, and I feel like it resonates. Because I read a lot about the reviews, and I like the particularly from the Jewish community in Turkey, and there have been like a lot of videos, and on I think it was on like T24. There were like a Jewish article writers who wrote about this. And I also had some Jewish friends, and their understanding was very similar to mine in terms of discourse of reconciliation. But on the other hand, Sultan, I understand the criticism that comes to that, as you said, because so the problem here is, I think the Jewish community, as they are in the center of the story, they are depicted very well. However, the Greek community, when we look at the numbers of the Greek characters and how they are depicted, there is a problem, especially with Tasula. I totally agree with you. And that damages that discourse of reconciliation, I agree, but still it's a valuable it's valuable because as the reaction is very good, and I perceive it that way. Is that fair to that community? Maybe we can talk about it. I mean, to the Greek community, definitely not. Because the Tasula character, when I watch it, it reminded me of those characters of women, you know, who is not really acting like in societal norms, right, out of the norms. That's the perception, and then that's how it is given. So I agree with you. The other problem, again, there are other questions I try to point out about, for instance, Ismet and Çelebi characters and the change in those characters. Is this helping to that discourse of reconciliation I am talking about? It does not, to tell you the truth, because Ismet has been victimized, and that he's the male Turkish character, right? And that's one of the things that have been, that's how I perceive, like patriarch and the manpower has been criticized through the movie, but then Ismet was victimized in the end. But he was but that there was a reference to his, you know, male power and everything, and they killed him, and they just, you know, they just design in such a way that those two male characters are, you know, were kind of, I don't know, it almost felt like they're not guilty anymore, although they are. But still, with those gaps in mind, I think the depiction of the Jews, and because it's given a lot of, it's motivating us to learn about the history of Jews in Turkey, and, you know, and I think it's, and the state and the policies and the unfair policies of the states and everything. And if the production, if the narrative pushes the viewer to think about these things, I think it's still valuable in the context of Turkey, because we know that there are, although next, I think it's also important to look at who is watching this, who are the viewers of the Netflix show, because it's not mainstream. In one of the questions, there was something like that, I remember. I think it's, is that the average people may be more educated, but we know that that is still valuable, because I know that people are like started reading about it more and everything. So that's the reason why I call it discourse of reconciliation.
Thank you.
So,
Roberta?
yeah, I think it was very unfortunate the way the Greek community was depicted in this series, both in part 1 and part 2. If we think about it, so Tasula is completely alone. She has no one, right? She's from the orphanage, and she keeps making comments about this. When Rachel complains about the fact that her mother suddenly shows up, she's like, at least you have a mother. Also, Rachel has the Jewish community around her. Istanbul had a vibrant Greek community. Even in 1950, there was a vibrant Greek community. Where are they? Why is Tasula so alone? Especially in a show that repeats this phrase over and over again, sahip çıkmak, sahip çıkmak. Somebody needs to come out as an owner of somebody else is the phrase, especially in season 2. Orhan and Kürşat are both represented as dönmez, people who turn their back on their own community, their own ethnicity, their own religion, both of them. They both do harm to their own people and other non-Muslims. Orhan, without flinching, is ready to fire everybody who is a non-Muslim in his club in order to get the accolade of best businessman of the year. Kürşat is the one who's going around and enforcing the rules about the wealth tax. I think it's very disturbing to me that one community is being put in the center. We're being encouraged to, look into the past, while another minority community is actually being depicted in just very stereotypical and unpleasant ways. I would love to know what some of the why decisions were taken, why season 2 went the way it did. There is a lot going on right now, and we don't know what choices were prompted, why and how. But Ethos also, another popular Netflix series that deals with current events in Turkey in very new and interesting ways, ended in a very sort of let's all get together, forget all our trauma, and let's be happy from now on. So where do we go from here? I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. I think this show has a lot of good sides. I think it's really done a nice job of awakening people who didn't know anything about these events. I wish that season 2 had not gone the way it did. And where we go, I wonder what everyone else thinks, because I don't know where we go next.
Let me read some of the questions. Maybe that will also help us see more. So I will take questions in pairs, and if there's more questions in the audience, please type them into the Q&A. So there is a question by Hila Cohen, which I think goes back a bit to like what Pelin said about the kind of more state organized long run of the riots and the lootings of 55. But she says, or he says, how do you interpret Kürşat's replacement of Çelebi as the show's main villain in the second season? What does this replacement say about how the show locates evil in the society it portrays? And then there's a second question by Daria Candiotti, question for Pelin Başçı. As Esra Uzdimish also mentions, the relationship between Matilda and Selim is one of solidarity. One of the bases of the solidarity is their divergence from traditional gender roles. Does gender play a role in Professor Başçı's formulation of this relationship as one based on cosmopolitanism?
Well, let me start from the second one because it comes directly to me, if I may. So, to be perfectly honest, I wanted to do something a little bit different. In my previous work, I thought about gender when I was writing about like Diamonds of Miss Salcombe, for example, or Autumn Pain, which are similar. There are very few films like this, I have to say, but they are very valuable and they have shortcomings too. So I was focusing on gender. In this one, I a little bit purposefully just turned to class. Going over gender and sexuality, perhaps. I was absolutely delighted to see the depiction of a character like Selim, who, like some of the audience here noticed, looked very much like Zeki Müren, right? I think that touched all of us too, in a way that I could not even have foreseen. Like if somebody said that's what they're going to do, I'd be like, yes, great. But like discovering it, how it's sort of revealed itself, I found very, very touching. I think that of course gives the character a marginal dimension, in this very patriarchal, heteronormative society, and an insight perhaps into how we're able to see from other people's perspectives and other ways of organizing ourselves. So I think that adds to their solidarity, absolutely. But I was trying to be more disciplined about just looking at, who's middle class, whose solidarity is working with whom, in a sort of a more systematic way, if you will. I thought there was another question, but
how do you interpret Kürşat's replacement of Çelebi as the show's main villain in the second season?
I had such high expectations after the first season, not only about the gaps related to maybe Russia leaving and coming, but also I was thinking perhaps we would learn more. For example, we had a lover, Ismet's lover. And where were we going to go there? Because like she happened to be working in British consulate. This is a time in which there's a lot of talk about Cyprus. Cyprus is a British colony at this time. Are we going to learn things about the British doing things behind the scenes, for example? I mean, I was just like, I had such high hopes. So similarly, with a character like Kürşat, when they came to watch the show to decide about the club and the show and about Orhan, I thought this was a setup for revealing darker energies and connections. Unfortunately, we really didn't get to see much of that in the remaining, presumably, second season. So what do I think about it? Yes, he sort of becomes the lightning rod for the evil, but I'm really one of those people who is hung up over like, this character cannot evolve this way. So like, I can't get over Chelibis becoming whomever he became. I mean, I'm not denying the possibility that he can change. It is just that he cannot change like this, and the storyline cannot change like that is the part. And something in my head tells me perhaps there were criticisms about Muslim characters in the show, and that this was an active remedying, but that you can't do that in like, it takes so many more maneuvers, and there are certain things you can do with a storyline and certain things you can't. So like, I don't have any thoughts about Kürşat other than we have seen that actor in other similar typecast roles. I will leave it at that.
Okay, Roberto or Esra, do you want to say something about Kürşat's role? It seemed that he brought in more systematicity, I thought, more like organization of the state. But Roberto.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think absolutely he was very much systematic, representing the state. But I had such hopes after season 1. I thought we would see Rachel in Israel starting a new life and then maybe coming back speaking Hebrew instead of Ladino. And we would see, what is going on in the States, and especially the British angle. I thought that would have been a fantastic line to follow. What are the British doing behind the scenes at this time period in Istanbul? Or maybe Ismet could become a kept man or something. I don't know. It was disappointing that none of those threads were followed.
So, Esra, you want to go?
So for Kurus, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, again, I try to ask the same question in my presentation, that it's interesting to see how Kürşat, again, he was absolved of his wrongdoings, and he just becomes almost an angel, and we like kind of like misunderstood everything about him. Type of scenario is what we actually see in Turkish movies a lot, right? Characters change a lot. So from that perspective, I think it's not surprising to see a character change like that in a Turkish soap opera. But as Professor Pelin said, I was also it was just so difficult, particularly to analyze, like when you watch it, when there's that kind of change, you just don't understand it. And I agree with Professor Pelin's comment and that I felt like they tried to kind of fix the image of the Turkish male character as Chelibis, as the character that is like against Matilda. I felt like they tried to like match the beauty to just turn it to almost a love story, and that's the reason why they created another devil Kürşat, I would say. That may be it, but it's hard to answer.
Yeah, thank you. So there are 2 more questions. One is by Elaine Papoulias, who writes, I would be interested to hear from any of the presenters what made this the right moment for this series to be made. It is interesting it is presented at a moment of growing political insularity of the ruling party and a continual decline in its tolerance of pluralism. The seemingly ever-rising authoritarianism of the president and a moment of discord in Turkey's foreign relations, particularly with Greece. How has the series been received in Turkey by mainstream viewers? Is there a certain demographic it has particularly been popular with?
I'll just jump in and say very impressionistically, I haven't seen any studies, so, I don't want to mislead anyone, but very impressionistically speaking, I think it is very well received, almost like a breath of fresh air, because like It is so stifling right now. We have singers being condemned. We have academics still struggling. We have people kept in jail for really no good reason from what I can see, like in the case of Kavala, for example. And so like, it feels really very stifling. And so being able to just think of another world in which, people who are marginalized are represented as one of us is actually very refreshing, I think, for a lot of people who are more cosmopolitan in their outlook, and they are feeling stifled, in this environment. So for them, it is a breath of fresh air. Of course, it has shortcomings. I think they sort of recognize that, but that context is very different from ours right now here. Or I don't know, maybe not. On the other hand.
I'm going to agree with Pelin 100%. I mean, we are living, or not we, but right now the situation in Turkey seems very repressive. A journalist recently was arrested for, she quoted a proverb that was not appreciated by Turkish politicians. Sezen Aksu, I mean, there were threats to cut her tongue out because she said something in a 2017 song. Adam and Eve were mentioned in ways that were not found acceptable. So there's a lot of repression, repression. I don't know what else to call it right now. And I think, yes, this show where people could imagine a different time, a different life, and different possibilities. I too have not seen any studies, but I think it was very well received. And I think, there's a novel that's much read these days too, Madonna in a Fur Coat. It also deals with people being able to escape identities and escape gender-based norms and all of this and just be themselves, find a free space where they can just be whoever they want to be. And I think that's partly why this show was appealing right now. We have gone over our time. I mean, I don't mind staying a few more minutes. I think, do we have more questions, Sultan?
We definitely have one more question, but I was wondering if Esra wanted to contribute, but I can also read the question and we just wrap up. So there's a question by Feyza Burak Adlı. To all panelists, what do you think about the role of the character of Orhan? He's a figure of power who did not hesitate to align with the Turkish state's racist policies, but in the end, he couldn't escape the fate of a victim and hence proved the impossibility of assimilation within the paradoxical logic of the Turkish nation state and citizenship. On the other hand, his character risks resonating with the right-wing conspiracy theories of the early republic, mostly on Dönme communities, but can be extended to all non-Muslim, non-Turkish communities about their alleged secret identities and agendas. I think that's a great question.
I think that's a great question too. I agree. There's a lot to be said about Orhan. I think we could do a panel on Orhan. That's really what I honestly think. Partly because of the relationship that I think Esra suggested, that Orhan and Selim, we have signs and symptoms of a gay platonic relationship or attraction between the two of them. I could be reading this wrong, but that's how I read it. And I thought, oh, that was a plot line that would be so interesting to find out. I also thought throughout that Orhan was horrified, like he was afraid. So a lot of what he did, I mean, that is my reading of the character, came not only from like grabbing opportunities and taking advantage or whatever. On the contrary, I thought it was coming from fear. I wish that was made more evident, perhaps. If we heard more about Orhan's backstory, again, that was another potential line of inquiry for the film that never really was explored fully, right? Where did they come from? Who were they? Like, we discovered there was this other identity as mother and son spoke, Greek, and as he tried to hide his mother's, identity and so forth, and was hard to manage with her illness. Which of course is a trope that exists. We see it also in the films like Pandora's Box, right? By Yeşim Ustaoğlu, this trope of, Alzheimer, mother memory keeping. and the identity coming back. But that was not explored at all. So, I'm going to just, phrase it and stay there. Like, I thought a lot of what he did came from fear, like utter sheer existential fear.
Thank you, Pelin.
Yeah, I mean, totally. We have that really tragic scene where, he comes home and his mother is really distraught and is closing all the shutters and saying, they're coming, they're watching us, they're coming. And then the end with the fire, I think, is very much pointing to the fire in Izmir, once upon a time. And we know they're refugees from Izmir. Also, I think I wish they had further explored Selim and Orhan and that relationship. It would have been a very nice sort of line of movement. But I think the whole question of memory is something else one could do a panel on in this show, because if you remember, Matilda doesn't remember who Chelebi is. Chelebi has not been able to forget her. She only discovers that they're connected when she breaks into his drawer and sees that he has pictures of her. She has to go to an older Jewish gentleman and ask him, who is this guy? So who forgets what, who remembers what are the strategies that allows them to survive in this society is another line of inquiry. Sort of memory, forgetting, remembering, and then dangerous memories. The mother's memories Nico's or Hans' mother's memories have to be shut down because they're a direct danger to him and his well-being. And that end was quite something, with the house burning down around them and the formerly aristocratic looking mother, her dead body. It was very sort of a devastating ending, I thought.
Okay, I think we're up with time. We're done with all the questions. Thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you so much for the participants, both for staying with us for so long and the wonderful questions. And
Thank you, Sultan. Thank you, Esra and Pelin. And I have to tell you all, Esra is also in the midst, recovering from COVID, not quite recovering, but dealing with COVID. So thank you so much for participating despite all of that. Thank you everyone for coming and staying with us, even though we went over time. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
thanks, Roberta, for organizing.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.